Now that you've been introduced to Monroe's and we've began speaking about persuasion, let's explore a little bit more about it and take a close look at the methods of persuasion. There are several elements that go into persuasion, starting off with your credibility, the evidence you use, the reasoning you ask your audience to use, fallacies to avoid, emotional appeals, and how to keep those emotional appeals ethical. Building credibility. Credibility begins when you start writing your speech, when you do your audience analysis, way before you ever even step on the stage. You need to demonstrate two main things in your credibility: your competence and your character. And let's look at this from the very beginning, going back to that audience analysis. You have been invited to speak somewhere. You are doing a presentation. And the reason that you are there is because they have determined you have the knowledge that they want you to share. For this reason, you're starting off with some competence. But other things you can develop from that audience analysis is what type of apparel you should be wearing to display your competence. If you're a police officer and you're going to go speak to a school about drinking and driving, you're not going to go there in your civilian clothing. You're not going to go there in a business suit. You're going to go there in your uniform. Why? Because that develops your credibility. We see this in advertising all the time. If someone is going to do a promotion where they want to sell you medication, they want to discuss treatments or cures, anything, you automatically, when they show up on camera, they're wearing a lab coat. They look like a medical professional. Why? That increases their confidence. That increases their credibility with the audience. Next, to develop their character, they don't come out there angry. They're not closing their body stance. They're not standoffish. They're open. They're discussing with you. They are showing you that they're like you and that they like you and that you can like them. All of this is based on character. So when you start off with credibility, remember to develop competence and character, it's going to start as early as your audience analysis and the first draft of your speech. You're going to need to maintain that though. And when you start to walk up and you're going to go up to the podium or you're going to stand in front of the audience, you need additional things to help you remain credible. So let's talk about the types of credibility. Your initial credibility, this can actually come from your introduction. From the person that's going to have you come up there and speak, they're going to introduce you in front of the Chamber of Commerce. They are going to introduce you to your audience. They're going to come up there and say, this is the smartest person I know. This person knows everything there is to know about. And they will start developing your credibility. And then based on what you've determined your audience expects of you, when you start to approach the podium in front of the audience and you're dressed like they expect you to be, you have credibility. That initial credibility is important because if you start low, you're starting off with a mountain to climb. On the other hand, if you come in and you really develop that initial credibility as you're entering into your introduction, you say, I am here to speak to you because I'm the #1 salesperson in the Northwest, or I did research on this for 5 years, or I have a degree in this. That introduction increases and it's part of your initial credibility. So remember, in that introduction, tell your audience why you're credible, why they need to listen, and why your persuasion should be considered. Then as you're delivering your speech, you're going to derive additional credibility. Like I said, if you started off low, this is your mountain to climb. If you start off and you just blew your introduction, you didn't show up dressed like you should, your audience analysis is shot, you got a long way to go to be persuasive. So you want that initial credibility, and then you're derived to continue it perhaps rise it a little bit, but not have to be a mountain. And the derived credibility occurs, how? Because you practice your speech. You know it. You have practiced your body language. You have points, you have signposts throughout your speech so your audience can follow along. All of this, your delivery is going to really impact your derived credibility. Like I said, you don't want it to have to be a steep mountain, maybe a slight incline, but start off with a strong initial and continue it as you're presenting. Then in persuasion, this final one is going to be what determines your success or failure for your audience. Terminal credibility. If you've done well on your initial and you've kept it up, but then suddenly you drop off, in that conclusion, you don't know your conclusion, you're reading from a paper, not speaking, not doing extemporaneous speaking, your credibility starts to take a dive. And then you ask at the end with your action statement, now that I've told you this, I want you to do this. Guess what? If your terminal credibility is shot, so is your persuasion. No one's going to act if they don't feel you're credible when you've presented your speech. So what you would ideally see is you start off with a strong credibility, you increase it a little bit, but your highest point should be in that terminal credibility, because by having that be your highest and most credible portion, you're going to be effective in persuasion. Now, how do you enhance it? You can enhance it through several ways. Explain your credibility. That's the easiest way. Let them know who you are, why you're credible, and what your resources are. Make sure that you're not throwing out bad resources or relying on information that's very questionable. Instead, explain it, and then use those in-text citations to reinforce what you've explained to them. Establish a common ground. This is why stories are important in persuasion. Because yes, you can throw a lot of great information out at your audience, and you could feel it's very persuasive, but they don't ever see you as a person. They don't see you sharing their journey, their struggles. You become an outsider, and outsiders are not influential. So to be persuasive, share those little elements. Share the story about how family or something that you commonly all encounter as college students, as people that work and attend college. You share those little stories because you're developing that common ground. And when people like you and they see you're like them, they're going to like what you're saying. So all of that will help you increase your persuasion. Finally, deliver your speech well. Take the time to write the full sentence outline so you know your information. Then break it down into that keyword outline so you don't have to read it. So you can make eye contact with your audience so you don't get lost in your speech. If you deliver it with that body language, with the openness, without filler words, without awkward pauses, but if you are able to deliver your speech effectively, you're going to be persuasive. Using evidence. Now you have credibility, you have to support things. You have to show evidence in a persuasive speech. Use specific evidence. This would be a case of if you're selling a car, you might talk about its safety rating. That's a very specific thing. Miles per gallon, sales, awards. All of those are very specific things that relate to your audience, especially those early ones of safety. If you're talking to a family, they want to know their car is safe. If you're talking to someone that has to do a daily commute, they want that gas mileage to be good. And so you're able to relate these. Now, novel evidence would be something they wouldn't necessarily know, but you could go into, all right, I've given you this specific, it's a safe car, it's rated high in safety. And then the novel evidence could be, did you know there are side impact sensors that if you should get into an accident, it will apply the brakes and it will deploy airbags from the side and from the front. Not everyone knows this. So this is a novel thing, something that your audience will go, oh, I didn't know that. And it increases their interest in the product or in your persuasion. Credible sources. Yeah, you absolutely want to use credible sources because you've developed your credibility. But if you end up developing your credibility and then you use unreliable resources, your credibility is going to tank. It's going to go down. What you need to do is have credible sources. That's why we talked about the CRAP test. That's why we talked about making sure you find scholarly resources. You mentioned American Heart Association, New England Journal of Medicine, American Cancer Society. All these have name recognition and they become credible sources. Make clear the point of your evidence. Don't have them guessing, oh, well, that might connect, I'm not sure how. I mean, if you're going to talk about safety, but you don't relate the safety to the audience, they may not see how that connects. And so you might pull up some evidence such as, did you know most accidents happen within 5 miles of your home? And that is why it is important to have a safe car. See, I brought it back to having a safe car versus just leaving it with, hey, here's something you didn't know. So make the point very clear for your audience. Reasoning. This is what your audience has to do. They have to reason why. From principle. From principle. This can be difficult at times because we are very dynamic people. We all have a different journey going on and our principles are different. But if you look at overall social ones, the importance of family, the importance of doing good, of justice, all these kind of God terms that we encounter, if it is common within the society, then they will say, oh, okay, based on principle, then I need to do this. So make sure you're looking at an overall social aspect of it, not too narrow of one where, okay, that principle theory isn't really shared by this group. So look for an overall social one and then utilize that. Causal reasoning, cause and effect. And I know we're in college, so I automatically here psychically I'm receiving that you're saying causation. Wait, what have I heard about causation? Oh, correlation and causation. Oh, there we go. Yes, absolutely is true. Just because something's correlated doesn't mean it causes the other. So when you're doing this, you need to make sure that you're using very specific and you are tying it together for them. You may want to say, all right, relationship between cause and effect. You drive a safe car, so therefore you are more likely to be uninjured in a car accident. Okay, safe car, less likely injury. We can do that. Don't make it abstract where they're going, I don't understand the connection. Such as, you drive a safe car, so ice cream is cheaper in June. Your audience will be just as confused as you just were. So make sure if you're using causal that it is a strong cause and effect, that is easily relatable, and your audience doesn't need a 20-minute explanation for. And analogical reasoning compares two similarities. And if the first case is true, then the second case is true. Be careful because this can lead easily to fallacies, which we'll talk about in a moment. But when you're looking at this, what you are trying to say is because you're a caring father and because you've taken the time to put up smoke detectors in your house and you have fire extinguishers in your house, it's the same way as when you buy a car, you buy the one that's highly safety rated. Because it all comes down to, if you care for your family, and that's why you take care of your home, you care for your car because you care for your family. They can see that. They can follow along. Here's what you want to avoid, though. Fallacies. Fallacies are too easy of a shortcut, and it's faulty reasoning. For that reason, you have ad hominem fallacy. You attack the speaker rather than the argument. Such a case could be made where someone such as Leonardo DiCaprio, where he spoke about the dangers of climate change. And people didn't come out and say, his argument's wrong. Instead, they came out and said, he's a Hollywood star. What does he know about? Or, he's a Hollywood star, and those Hollywood stars, they jet across the country on private planes. How could they care about climate change? Well, that wasn't really looking at his argument. Really wasn't looking at what he was saying. It was an attack on him personally. And for that reason, that becomes an ad hominem fallacy. The straw man. Now, if we take the same instance, we were just talking about Leonardo DiCaprio, what they might say is, well, instead, we're going to build up something that he really wasn't attempting to say. So in his case, where he's talking about climate change, they may come back and say, well, he says we need to cut carbon emissions by businesses by 10%. He's against big business. He hates big business. This entire thing is all about big business. It's not about climate, it's about big business. In other words, they built something. Yes, you could say that his argument did include some element of it, but that really wasn't the case. And rather than attacking his argument, they created a new argument, a straw man to attack. Appeal to ignorance. This one is kind of a fun one. I enjoy this. This is the one where because you don't see it, that proves it's there. This could be argued such as if someone was to come up and say, you know, leprechauns. Leprechauns are great at hiding. You don't see them unless they want you to see them. So because you have never seen a leprechaun, that proves there's leprechauns. Ignorance is used as the premise of the argument. So just because something isn't there, it's proof that it does exist. And you can see how this becomes convoluted and messy. False dilemma or dichotomy. In this case, it's either or. Well, either you're for this or you're against it. There's nothing in between. And as we have often seen, there's a lot in between. You could be for raising the speed limit on the highway to 90 miles an hour. You could be for that. But that doesn't mean that the only option is everyone has to drive 90 and anyone under the speed of 90 is going to be kicked off the highway. No. That just means you're for increasing the limit. Or you could be for lowering it. And you could see how they could say, well, if you're for that, then absolutely you're against safe driving. Or if you're for that, then you're absolutely against. This is either it's one way or the other. And unfortunately, the world is in a lot of gray area. People know that. So to be persuasive, don't give them this false dichotomy. Slippery slope. We know this one. Well, if we permit this, then before you know it, this is going to happen. You know, if we permit Wi-Fi throughout the city, well, automatically, suddenly we'll have to give away milk and we'll have to give away TVs and computers. And if we take this one small step, it's going to lead to this huge disaster. And that's the slippery slope. As you know, just because one thing occurs does not mean everything else will fall. You know, we have perhaps done some things where, oh my gosh, we've permitted this and now the fall of civilization is going to occur. No, it doesn't happen that way. Avoid that fallacy. Hasty generalization. These are too often used, and they're based on the worst aspect of who we are as people. And this is assumptions based on stereotypes, where we create an us and them, and we're going to attack the them, and we're going to do so by hasty generalization. We're going to say they're lazy, they're not smart, or they're going to be criminals. These hasty generalizations do not take into account all people are different. And it's not, I'm not talking about groups of people, I'm talking about every one of us is different from the next one. And if we start applying stereotypes, it absolutely is unethical, and it brings out the worst part in us. Red herring. Inclusion of an off-topic, while appearing relevant, it's not really relevant. And we see this oftentimes in debate, where it's like, aha, Well, you can't trust this politician because their uncle was arrested for DUI last week. It seems related, but how is a person responsible for what their uncle did? They're not. So that's a red herring. They're throwing something out there that seems like it's important, but it truly isn't. So watch for the red herring. This is also one of the writer's favorite things to throw in when they're trying to mislead you in a crime novel. They'll throw in a red herring and you'll think, oh, that's the person that's guilty. And then later you just find out, no. So watch for the red herring. Uh, Causal fallacy, illogical connection along lines of correlation is not causation. As we mentioned just a couple slides ago, this is absolutely one thing that we do encounter, and we have to be careful with encountering these, because we might say something along the lines of, did you realize ice cream consumption increases violent crime in a city? Now, if you're looking at that, you would see that violent crime does peak at the same time as ice cream sales. Is ice cream sales causing the crime? No. The crime is actually being caused because ice cream sales and crime increase in the heat of summer. So the hottest months have the highest of each. That is one of the fallacies. And the fallacy of sunken costs. We've done it this way so long, well, we just got to keep doing it this way. We see this often. I've already invested $5 million. I better invest another $2 million because otherwise I'll lose the $5 million. Instead of looking at it as you're going to lose the $7 million. So sunken costs means that you continue pursuing a wrong avenue just on the basis that you've already invested in it. And finally, the assertion, where you just repeat a lie often enough that people start to believe it. There are little green men outside your house. There are little green alien men outside your house. There are little green lizard men outside your house. And they hear it so often that eventually they're looking outside their house for the little green alien lizard men. So avoid this as well. As we've talked about, the main reason that people are persuasive is because they connect to other people. They draw emotions. Hopefully we're drawing positive emotions, because emotional appeals, as we have known from watching TV, can also be very sad. And we don't want sad appeals. We want appeals that are positive. So when you look at this list of appeals that people make, fear. Yes, fear is a great motivator, but it also takes your audience down. It lowers them. They get anxiety. They get depressed. So fear is going to draw, you'll get their attention, they will connect, but they're also going to be emotionally down. That's why you oftentimes will hear people use fear in sales pitches, like your house will be broken into, horrible things will happen. And they come up with this. And then they do bring their audience out. So if you use something negative, make sure you bring your audience out. Your house will be broken into unless you buy this wonderful anti-theft device for only, and now imagine yourself. That's where that imagine part of the rubric comes in, because you're now having them visualize not fear, but the absence of fear. Because by buying this wonderful product, you no longer have to be fearful, and you can now not have anxiety, and you can exhale and feel good. So emotional appeals, you can base on fear, compassion. Compassion is something that we all share. It's a value. Having empathy and caring for others is important for us. It makes us feel better about ourselves. Pride. We all have pride. Look at sporting events. I mean, you have people that are proud to be Raider fans, Chief fans, Patriot fans, Bronco fans. There are a lot of fans out there, but they all have pride in their team, or they have pride in their city. And because they have pride in their city, you could convince them perhaps to volunteer to clean up the city, or to volunteer to help with an event. Anger. Anger is one to avoid. You don't want an angry audience, because it's actually very difficult to bring them back from being angry to being rational. And you want them in rational in your action statement, because that's going to give them a reason to listen to your persuasion. So anger, avoid that. One reason is because it's hard to get them out of that feeling. Two, because when you start to talk about some of these negative emotions, we're going to talk about ethics in a minute. Guilt. I'm a parent. All of us parents know this. We utilize guilt probably too often. However, guilt can indeed work. And when you start looking at this, reverence, you want to be, as a parent, you want to be revered. You want your people to look up to you. You want your children to care and look up to you. And all of these are emotional appeals. Now, you don't just utilize one of them. You can utilize a combination of them, but you need to make sure that you don't, if you take your audience down, you bring them back up, because people that are angry, fearful, and feeling guilty have very little motivation to be persuaded. Emotional language is part of the emotional appeal. Vivid examples. That's why you see the car being broken into. That's why you see the sad faces. That's why you see when people are visualizing, you're visualizing a positive emotion like joy or happiness, you're going to see people playing volleyball. You're going to see them driving the car up in the mountains and the joy that they're having in the fun. Vivid examples, you want to make it a little bigger than life. That's the reason why you don't just see the person driving the Jeep through a small mud puddle on a dirt road. Oh no, they are an extreme. They are driving through a river in the middle of the mountains, because it's more vivid. It's more jumps out. One thing you need to make sure is that you're sincere, though. If you're drawing on emotions, you're not just using it to manipulate your audience. Instead, you're sincere. You're concerned about their safety. You're concerned that they're happy. You want to make sure that whatever you are trying to persuade them is delivering that true emotion, and not just telling them, oh, this will make you happy, and you don't believe it. You think it's a red product that's no good, but you're here to sell. No, you want to be sincere and have conviction, because it makes you more persuasive and makes it easier to connect with the audience, and you truly feel that you're blessing your audience, not just taking from them. Ethics and emotional appeal. All of these can become so unethical quickly. You have to really be careful, because you don't want to just play on the psychology of a person, on their emotions. You don't want them to regret that they did the action that you offered to them. You don't want them to have that credibility you establish evaporate the moment they drive the car home. No, you want to make sure your motivation is you're truly trying to give your audience something important. You're sincere about it, you have your conviction about it, that is truly a blessing for your audience, and that you're not just in it to take for profit. All right? That really can wipe out the ethical. As we talked about with ethics early on, when you're developing your speech, the very first thing is why you're doing it. And if that why is unethical, your entire speech is unethical. So watch for emotional appeals. Yes, they are persuasive, but they can easily become unethical if you overdo it, if you leave them in a negative space. What we needed to talk today about was our credibility, evidence, reasoning, fallacy, emotional appeal, and ethics, all related to what? Persuasive methods. Of course, if you have questions, email me, message me, let me know. We got a fast-moving course here. Persuasion is actually our climax of things here, because we're using our stories that we used in our introduction speech. We're using information like we used in our informative speech, and now we're on to persuasion. I'll see you online.